Here are 10 examples of bands that borrowed, stole, or parodied album artwork. Do some of these album covers look too close to the original? Decide for yourself. Check out the cover of the 1971 album Thinks School Stinks by the English pop band Hot Legs. The cover features a scratched up old school desk. If this looks familiar, it's because the Alice Cooper band used a nearly identical concept for the cover of the School's Out album, which came out a year later. But Alice Cooper took things to the next level. The Alice Cooper cover opened to reveal the contents of the desk, and inside of there was the record wrapped in a pair of paper panties. And of course, School's Out was a massive hit, and unfortunately, Thinks School Stinks failed to chart at all. Nonetheless, you have to wonder if it served as the inspiration for the iconic Alice Cooper cover. Here's another cool one. This is the cover of Free's self-titled second album released in 1969. It features the bottom side of a lady with a partly cloudy sky in the background. It also looks a lot like the cover to Lorde's third studio album, Solar Power, released in 2021. Lorde has said the album cover was photographed by her friend on the beach while she jumped over her. It's not a direct ripoff of the Free cover, but there certainly are similarities right down to the outstretched arms. The Lorde cover was censored with a lens flare in some markets. I'm using the censored version in this video to stay within YouTube's community guidelines. I did a video a month or two back on 15 bands accused of ripping off album artwork. I'll leave a link to that episode in the video description. A number of you asked why I didn't include We're Only In It For The Money by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention in that episode. It's because I can only show so many album covers in one video, but I did want to touch upon that record right now. The Zappa record lampoons the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which came out a year earlier. At the time, Zappa phoned Paul McCartney asking permission for the parody. Apparently, Paul didn't have any issues, but he suggested it was something for management to work out. Afraid of getting sued by Capitol Records, Zappa's label released We're Only In It For The Money with the Beatles cover as interior artwork. Zappa was none too happy with this and publicly criticized McCartney for his reluctance to talk business and blamed record company politics for the delay in the album's release. In recent years, the Zappa album has been reissued with the intended front cover. No word on how Sir Paul feels about that. Here's another one I didn't know about until viewer Alan Hansen brought it up. Check out the cover of Saga's 2012 album called 2020. The album didn't really do much chart-wise, but it did have a very cool album cover. So cool, in fact, that Justin Timberlake nicked the title and the imagery for his 2013 release, The 2020 Experience. That's right, you have Saga with 2020 in 2012, and a year later, you have Timberlake with the 2020 Experience. As viewer Alan Hansen mused, was this a blatant and cowardly copy or a respectful and smart homage? Let me know what you think in the comments below. My pal Brandon, Mr. Hall of Fame on YouTube, pointed out the similarities between the cover of Van Halen's 5150 and the self-titled debut from R&B funk band Slave. These albums were released about 9 years apart, but they do feature similar imagery, referencing Atlas from Greek mythology. Atlas is a titan responsible for bearing the weight of the heavens on his shoulders, a burden given to him as punishment by Zeus. Atlas is also referenced in the Metallica song Atlas Rise from the Hardwired to Self-Destruct album. 5150 wasn't the first time Van Halen borrowed an idea for an album cover. The follow-up, the 5150, OU812 from 1988, pays homage to the Beatles and specifically the album Meet the Beatles or With the Beatles. Both covers feature black and white photos of the band members with their faces partly hidden in the shadows. On the Beatles cover, the left side of their faces are lit, and on the Van Halen cover, the right side of their faces are lit. The two covers are kind of mirror images of each other. A few of you left me comments pointing out the similarities between the cover of the Van Halen debut and the Beatles' Let It Be. I don't know, man. It's certainly not a direct ripoff. Steeler, the 1980s band that featured guitar virtuoso Yngwie Malmsteen, did rip off the Van Halen debut. Check out the cover of Steeler's first album, released in 1983, and compare that to the '78 Van Halen record. Side note, there is a debate that has raged on for years over whether Van Halen stole their logo from a Jimi Hendrix poster. Van Halen biographer Greg Renoff disputes that claim and says it's actually the opposite. Apparently, a graphic designer borrowed the Van Halen logo for the poster, which came out in a 1980 Hendrix box set 2 years after Van Halen's debut. One final Van Halen album before we move on. Check out the cover of Van Halen's 2012 album, A Different Kind of Truth. Now take a look at the Commodore's 1975 release, Movin' On. The two are nearly identical, except the angle of the locomotive is reversed. The Van Halen cover concept was reportedly developed by David Lee Roth. It features an old file photo of a New York Central steam locomotive. The image was reportedly chosen because it looks like the locomotive is in motion and coming off the page. I kind of dig that. In fact, I dig both album covers, but the similarities are impossible to ignore. This is a fun one. Check out the cover of Stormtroopers of Death's Bigger Than the Devil from 1999. Of course, it's a ripoff or a tribute or an homage to Maiden's Number of the Beast. The title of the album also pokes a bit of fun at John Lennon, who once proclaimed the Beatles were more popular than Jesus Christ. Stormtroopers of Death, or SOD, are a crossover thrash band whose members include Scott Ian and Charlie Benante from Anthrax. Speaking of Anthrax, the cover of their 2018 live album, Kings Among Scotland, is a very obvious parody of the Kiss album, Rock and Roll Over. In my previous video on album cover ripoffs, I talked about the Manowar album, Fighting the World from 1987. That artwork was an obvious tribute to the Kiss Destroyer album. Manowar even had the same artist do the artwork, Ken Kelly. Here's another tribute to the Kiss Destroyer record that several viewers pointed out to me. The album is called Destroyed by punk band Sloppy Seconds. It came out in 1989 and has been reissued several times. Have you seen the cover of Kid Rock's 2006 album Live Trucker? It's a rip-off of Bob Seger's Live Bullet. Live Bullet was released in 1976. That album, along with Night Moves, are credited with launching Seger's mainstream popularity. Kid Rock, by the way, is a huge Bob Seger fan. He has said he wants to model his career after Seger's. And as always, I've saved the best for last. This is the cover of the Dead Milkmen's 1990 release Metaphysical Graffiti. I love that name. It's a great name for an album. And of course, the name and artwork parody Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti. The title was apparently inspired by the band passing around Zeppelin biography Hammer of the Gods on the tour bus. Needless to say, Metaphysical Graffiti is an eclectic album. Highlights include a children's nursery rhyme called Beige Sunshine and a track called If You Love Somebody, Set Them on Fire. A play, of course, on Sting's If You Love Somebody, Set Them Free. Alright, 33ers, remember to check out my previous video on album cover ripoffs. There are a ton of good ones there. Thank you for watching. I'll be back again soon. Until then, keep on spinning.